Welcome back to Life Speaks podcast. I'm your host, Daniel. I'm here with my gorgeous wife, Liz.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us today. We have another great episode for you today.
Yes.
Today we are joined by Ruby Felan, the wife
Ruby.
of Ray Felan from last week, or from the last episode anyways. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Real quick, Jennifer, go to this camera.
Oh.
All right, just pull this, the mic down just a little bit.
There?
So it doesn't cover,
Is it in my face?
just
Okay.
cover your face, yeah.
How would you introduce your radio show? I want to hear it. Now that we have the setup, I'm like, ooh, how would she
It's been
introduce?
like
What's your
over
radio
26
persona?
years. Okay, which one? WOAI or KSYM?
Both. Let's do both.
Well, I used to introduce the countdown, the top 10 music countdown, but my show was bilingual on WOAI. So, en esta semana en la cuenta regresiva, you know. So yeah.
Nice.
And then I had my show on KSYM. It was, hi, this is Ruby, and you're in the rough, and that's how.
Nice.
Yeah.
How long did you do radio for?
Just a few years. I was in school for radio, television,
Okay.
and film, and so I got an associate's degree in radio, television, film. So that was just 2 years. I was at WOAI probably for maybe a year, I want to say, but I was working at WOAI and at Fox at the same time. And when Fox offered me full time, I took it, and
You
so
took
I left
it, yeah.
WOAI. But I really liked it. WOAI it was different, you know.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, she knows how this all works.
I know,
She's
I
like,
love
let
the
me
setup. It's
move
like,
over. Let me show you how it's done.
No, it's been a long time.
You amateurs.
Let's go. Well, thank you for joining us. So are you, we kind of talked a little bit with your husband. Are you excited and you not excited to be going
Anxious.
to Hungary? I know he mentioned the kids, the grandkids now, so it's going to be a lot harder than
Right.
it was before.
It definitely does feel more like a sacrifice this time. When we went to Brazil, it was almost 10 years. No, it was 10 years ago, actually. And, you know, my mom was 10 years younger. She was in better health. She's not in horrible health right now, but I'm the one who helps her with her health. You know, I didn't have grandbabies back then. My son's wife just had a baby right around October. And so there's the grandbaby, and then my sons went with us, you know. So this time they're not.
They're not coming. Yes. Yeah.
And even though I believe you know, one of them's already married. He's an adult. He's a dad. And the other one's an adult, but he's the baby. He just turned 18, right? And so even though he's fully equipped to be on his own, I mean, he's been fully equipped since he was probably 12 years old. You know, he's still my baby.
Yes,
So
yeah.
it's difficult.
You're
Yeah.
leaving them behind, and it's just
Right.
not an hour away. This is a whole continent
Whole
away.
continent, right?
So what do they think? Are they sad to see you guys go to? Or are they like, don't go?
You know, they're excited. I mean, with my youngest son, when we first gave him the news, he kind of got up, put his hands in his hair, and walked in a circle.
Oh.
And he was like, and he just said, I thought I would have at least a couple more years. You know, I thought y'all would evangelize for maybe 10 years because it was already 8 years.
Yeah.
And I told him, actually, so did I, you know. I'm not ready for this either. But he just right away went into, okay, this is what I need to do. This is what I need to take care of before they leave, and started planning like right then and there. And so so he was okay with it. I mean, he's okay with it. He went up and congratulated us on the stage. He was calling all his siblings, you know, while we
yes.
were up there on the stage. So as soon as I was walking down from the stage, or we were, my other son called, because he's guarding our border right now. He's in the guard, and he's guarding the border in the valley. And he called, and he's like, "Mom, it's about time! Congratulations!" And he was all excited.
Good. They were excited.
Yeah,
good.
we're
Good.
excited,
Good.
so.
Good.
Okay. So let's go ahead and just get straight into your testimony. So let's go ahead and start, you know, from your childhood. Tell us your upbringing, the family life, your parents, and whatnot.
Well, that's broad.
It is.
So I guess, you know, start off with, you know, one of the things we like to focus on these podcasts is the influence that our upbringing has on us and our decisions later in life, right? So one of those being obviously your parents, their relationship with each other, but also their relationship with you. You know, did you have a father? Was he around? Were your parents divorced or not? Did you have siblings? Was religion, did it play a part in your childhood? That kind of stuff, right?
Right. Okay, yeah, okay, so I grew up, I was the youngest of three girls. I was the baby. My dad wanted sons, but he got a bunch of girls. And so when my mom was pregnant with me, he was sure this one's going to be a boy, right? So my dad was a boxer prior to being married to my mom. He was a boxer in the military. He was lightweight champion of Japan.
Oh,
And
cool.
so, yeah, so he was really good at it. And so he went out, he bought a weight set, a heavy bag. Like,
Oh,
he's like,
he
this
was
is
going to
be,
train his boy.
Uh-huh. So back then they didn't have, I guess, the technology to find out if it's a girl or a boy, right? So, so as soon as I was born and they announced it's a girl, you know, my mom was out. She wasn't awake, I guess, for the delivery. So she came and she asked him, "What do we have?" And well, when he came to her, she asked him, "What do we have?" And he's like, "It's a girl. She's pretty, but it's a girl." You know. So he gave away his weight set. He gave away his heavy bag. Funny thing is, though, is that when I was in school, like in junior high, especially, is when it started. They would call me Sugar Ray Ruby because, you know, I was little, so I would get picked on a lot. And so the very first fight that I had, you know, they're like, wow, like she fights like a boxer. So they started calling me Sugar Ray Ruby.
Oh,
And
cute.
so, yeah. And my dad would have me there doing one-arm push-ups.
Oh,
you know?
he was
did
training you.
And
He
my mom would
trained.
tell him, don't teach her how to fight. You're teaching the wrong one. She's going to use it, you know. But so, you know, I had, you know, I was daddy's little girl. I really was. Like, you know, he would dress me up to match him, and he would take me to the office. My parents, they loved each other, and I really, really loved my dad. He was my hero when I was a little girl. And they loved each other, but they couldn't get on the same page, you know. My dad, we would call him our rock star dad because he was a politician. And so he, you know, was in the bars, in the clubs, you know, carousing with women. We would call him a rock star dad. Like, Dad, you think you're a rock star, you know? Even in his 70s, he was getting into barroom brawls and
Oh, my
DWI
goodness.
accidents, you know?
Oh, my
And
goodness.
so, yeah, so it's just like, okay, Dad, like, time to settle down right now.
Yeah.
He was a lot of fun, I will say that. But so, you know, so they couldn't get on the same page. And so there was, because my mom wanted a quiet, simple life, you know, my dad would go out to the bars or go out drinking with his friends, and my mom didn't want to be a part of it, so she wouldn't go. Then he would come back and she would be mad, you know, it caused problems within the marriage. And so there would be fights over it. And then sometimes, you know, it would turn violent because, you know, my dad was a boxer, right? And so my mom was not my mom, like, he wasn't like this horrible, abusive person or anything, it's just sometimes it would get violent, and my mom wasn't afraid of him, so she would stand up to him and stuff, you know. But they loved each other. They just couldn't get on the same page. But as I started getting older, I started really resenting my dad for that, you know, and even resenting my mom for putting up with it. You know, so I grew up Catholic, and as a matter of fact, went to the same church as Pastor Felan.
Oh, wow.
We didn't know each other, though.
Oh, you don't remember him? Nothing? No, okay.
No, we did not meet until we were at the door. And so, yeah. And so we were both about 16 years old when we got saved. So, you know, so I grew up with that. And I would see even, I resented my priest because he would get drunk with my dad. Like, they would have these festivals at the church, and the priest would be there drinking with my father, and I would be like from a distance watching, furious, thinking, that is destroying my family, and you should be telling him not to do that, and you're doing it with him, you know. So I really, really had a resentment towards that. So I remember, as a matter of fact, that I learned that idolatry was a sin in CCD, because we were covering the 10 Commandments, and every Sunday we would learn a different commandment. And so they taught me, I mean, I memorized the verse there, is you should not make for yourself any graven image, not of heaven above, not of the earth, or of the sea below, because God is a jealous God. He's going to visit this iniquity to your third and fourth generation. And then we leave CCD and we go into Mass, and I'm like, the holy water, do the sign of the cross, all of the saints with the candles, the big Jesus on the cross, and also when you get up, sit down, you know?
Yeah.
And I was just like, this is all idolatry. You know? I was like, I'm not doing it. And so I sat in church like this, the whole service, right? So my mom comes and she picks me up, and I get in the car and said, I don't know what's right, but this isn't right, and I'm not coming back. And she's like, you have to. I was like, Dad doesn't come to church, and I am not going to come. I was like, I don't know what's right, Mom, but this isn't. They told me themselves, and I am not going to do this to my grandkids and my great-grandkids.
So you knew that this would be passed down.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
What age did you
I
say that?
think I was about 11.
Oh, wow.
Wow,
Yeah.
you were young.
Yeah. And not only that, but I had also had to go do my confession because I was going to communion. So that year. And so I told her, see, I told you this doesn't work. No, it was before that. It was before this part. Because I told her, Mom, this doesn't work. And she goes, well, I was like, this confession was worse than last year's. Isn't it supposed to get better? You know? And she's like, what did you tell the priest? You know?
I told him everything.
Yeah.
I told him everything.
Yeah. But so then, the relationship, it got worse. My dad started to drink more. My father came from a line of alcoholics. His father, he got killed because he was drunk, but he was not doing anything wrong. He was trying to help a little boy cross the street, but he was drunk and he was stumbling across the street, and I guess he got into the road the wrong way and he got ran over. So when I was young, I started drinking. It's funny because you become what you hate, right? I hated that my father would drink, but when I was very young, I started drinking myself.
How old were you when he died?
I was 40 when my dad died.
Oh, okay.
This is her grandfather.
Oh, sorry, grandfather.
Yeah, right. My dad was only 3 years old when his dad died, and so it got worse, and it got to the point where the fighting was so often, and to where it was affecting how they were now relating and interacting with us. And then my oldest sister, was also she was very, how can I say it? She was mean. I don't know what nice way to put it.
She was an older sister.
She was a mean older sister. So my middle sister, she was always very good to me. We've always been very close. But the older one, she was very, very mean. But she saw the worst of it too, and she understood more at that age because she was 6 years older than I. And so it got to the point where I told my mom, I was like, you know what? If you don't divorce Dad, I'm leaving. And you're never going to see me again, because if he catches me after running away, I know I'm going to really get it.
Yeah.
And so if you don't do something about this, I'm going to do something about this, because nobody should live like this. And
was it spilling over the abuse to you girls?
No, my father never ever abused us at all. No,
Okay.
he wouldn't. I mean, he was actually very, very godly in the way he would discipline us. I mean, except that he would express his anger. Like, he was only 5'2" or 5'3", but when he got mad, he looked like the Hulk. Like, he grew and turned green.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but he never abused us. No.
Okay.
And like I said, he wasn't like an abusive husband. It's just sometimes he would get so mad he would hit my mom.
Yeah.
And so, but still, it's like they were fighting all the time. There was times I didn't even know, like, how did my dad make it home? Because he would drive into the driveway and he was passed out on his steering wheel when I would go to get up for school in the morning.
Yeah.
And I think he was not wanting to be home, so he was just staying out more because they were always fighting too. So they did. My mom did divorce my dad, and
How old were you at that time?
at 14. Okay. And so I remember when I got saved, I carried that for a long time, because I was like, I pushed my mom to divorce him. I'm sure it was in her mind there somewhere, but I don't think she would have done it because of us. Because I remember when I told her that, she's like, and what about y'all? Who's going to help me with y'all? I was like, I don't know, Mom. We'll figure it out, but I can't do this anymore. And so
when did you start experimenting with drinking then?
When I was 14, because Dad was out of the house, and now I could. And I had a friend who got married. She got married at 15. She was a year older than me, and she married a guy who was like 19. And they were renting like a mobile home, and so I would go to her mobile home all the time. He was old enough to buy alcohol, and so we would just start drinking. And I would actually go and visit her before school, and we would even drink before school.
Oh my God! So did she still attend school? Would you guys still go to school together, or?
She did for a little bit, because he had promised her mom that he would let her finish school, but he was very, very jealous, and so she did for a little bit. But after a while, he didn't let her go anymore.
Let her go.
Yeah.
So did you become heavy into drinking?
Pretty heavy. Not at that point. I got heavier later. At that point, I would drink a lot, because I would drink before school, and so I would be tipsy. But one time, I was like really drunk when I got to school, and I was going to class, and I fell down the stairs. And so my dad was a supervisor for the school district, So everybody knew me, right? All the administrative faculty, everybody knew me. And so my counselor, they took me to my counselor. They didn't take me to the principal for whatever reason. And he had known me since junior high. So now I'm in high school. He had known me since junior high. And so he told me, he's like, I think you're the youngest alcoholic that I know. He's like, and don't think that we don't see that you are coming to school drunk. We do. We just aren't doing anything about it.
You weren't fooling them.
Right. My grades were, I was in the main event, which we were the color guard for the school. And during football season, it's just normal color guard. But during basketball season, we were Texas State champions. We were, top 10 in the nation every year of my high school year. We even made it to third in the nation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I'm functioning in that. Plus, because my parents had separated or divorced, I had to work. My mom sat me down and said, look, everything that you're involved in, I cannot afford, and I don't know what I'm going to be able to count on from your father at this point. It doesn't look like it's going to be amiable. And so if you want to continue into the things you want to do, you're going to have to go to work.
You need to pay for it.
Yeah. So I went to the mall. I lied on an application, submitted, that I was 16 years old at a cookie shop. I was 14. They hired me, and a couple of weeks later, I told the owner, I was like, I'm only 14, right? He goes, I know, but you work really good. I'm going to keep you. I was like, okay. so I'm, working a job. I mean, back then, what would be equivalent to the AP classes, which was called Advanced Honors, the program. I wasn't like top 10 in my class or anything. It's like I would do just enough. I had a photographic memory, so I would do just enough to make sure I passed, so I could be performing in the garden, so I wasn't going to flunk, right?
Yeah.
But I wasn't giving myself to my academics either.
Yeah.
So I'm working, I'm practicing. We practiced all the time, and then I'm doing school. And so, and I had a social life, and so.
Yeah, just busy.
Yeah.
So when your parents got divorced, did you still have a relationship with your dad, or did he kind of drop out of the picture a little bit?
No, I did. And I remember when my dad got served. It was 3 days before Christmas. And
oh, wow.
Yeah. And my mom wasn't home when he got served, and he got the papers. I didn't know what was going on. But I remember just watching him, like when he opened it, and it's like he got hit, like in the face.
Yes.
And he just sat down on the sofa, and then my mom drove up, and she came in, and he showed her the papers. And, they just sat there crying together and crying. And it was like ripping me up. But in my mind, all I could say was, it's for the best, though. It's for the best, It's like things haven't progressed here. They've been married for years. It's not getting better. It's getting worse. So, yeah. And so... So my dad, he would, so like, he'd call me like, hey, are you hungry? Do y'all have dinner? He would bring us food. He would come see us. We would see him. I still was mad at him though, right? So I very much took on an attitude towards him. Even like to my graduation, to this day, it pains me. But I didn't invite him to my graduation. I transferred out of the school that, his father built Southside High School. His grandfather, built Southside High School, and so my father's family was the first Hispanic family to settle there. So my great-grandfather's on the mural there at South San with all like Jesse Borrego and politicians and stuff like that. Yeah. And so, so it meant a lot to him that we went to South San, right?
Yeah, to his school.
But I had skipped so much my senior year. I missed so much school. I was like, there's no way they're going to graduate me. I am not going to repeat a year. So I transferred out to another school. And I didn't invite my dad to my graduation, but he found out when I was graduating, and he showed up anyways. And he made it a point to let me see him,
Yeah.
But I just I saw him, and I just totally ignored him in front of her. Like to this day, it hurts me because, like I said, he was a very good dad. My parents were very, very good parents, and they really did love each other. They just couldn't get on the same page,
Yeah.
And so that takes work on both ends, and I don't know that maybe they weren't willing to work. I don't know what it was. They just really wanted different lives,
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah. So, go ahead.
You talk really fast, so I'm like trying to process everything.
I know. I heard you're a good editor. I'm like, I hope he's really good because I talk quick.
You stumped him.
Like, where if I go? Okay.
I know. I was watching my husband he's so calm.
I'm like, and we went from birth to high school in 15 minutes. So You were saying though that you got saved at 16.
I did.
Okay, so you were saved from 16 to graduation.
Okay, I was saved from 16 to 17. By the time graduation came around, I was no longer saved.
Okay. So tell us about how you met the Lord and how that happened.
Okay, so I used to write song lyrics for all the rock bands at my school. Not all of them, but the ones that I liked, right? I really liked writing, and I was a big Edgar Allan Poe fan, and I was a huge Iron Maiden fan. Huge. I didn't even date for like the first 3 years of high school because I was like, I'm marrying Bruce Dickinson. You're just a kid. Leave me alone, you know?
Yeah. Oh, how funny.
And so, yeah. So anyways, so my friends, one of the rock bands, they got saved, and they stopped, you know, like, I mean, they never drank and they never did drugs, never. Which, yeah, I was kind of surprised when I became friends with them. I was like, wow, I was like, I had experimented a little bit with drugs, but
it wasn't your thing.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, so they got saved, and so now they were always talking about Jesus, and I was going to church, and I would hang around with them, but they never really invited me to church up to this point, right? But so I stopped cussing, stopped drinking, stopped, you know, doing things that I shouldn't do, and I started listening to Stryper. I don't know if y'all know Stryper.
Christian metal band.
Yeah. And so I thought, so I'm a Christian too, right? That's what I thought. But I would be with them. We'd be at school or wherever at the mall, and I'd be like, there's something they have that I don't. I don't know what it is, but I'm not like them, you know?
Yeah.
Even though I was trying to identify with them. So my English teacher, she called me out of class one day. So by this time, my parents are divorced. I'm working, so I'm making, back then it was good money, $3.14 an hour.
Yeah, cha-ching.
I know. Right? You know, we're doing very well in color guard. I was very popular in school. I was very popular. I didn't realize I was popular, but you know, I never hardly ever had any problems at school. Like, good. At this time, I did have a boyfriend. These are falling. Need to adjust them. At that point, I did have a boyfriend. Everything was like good, right?
Right,
like
yeah.
there was no problems. My parents weren't together anymore, so there was no fighting. Was my older sister in the home? She was in the home, but she wasn't home a lot, is what it was.
Yeah.
So it had mellowed out. My life had just pretty much mellowed out, but everything was on the going up, right? So, so my teacher, she calls me out of class, and she's like, I just wanted to tell you that I don't live very far from the school. And she told me where she lived, and she said, I've noticed lately that you're really depressed, and I just want you to know I'm here for you, and if you ever need to talk, this is where I live, you can come see me. And I was like, oh, okay, well, thank you, you know. And so I went back to class, and I'm like, why am I depressed? And I'm analyzing my life. I'm like, everything's good. Like, what's wrong with me? Why am I sad, you know?
Yeah.
Instead of thinking, no, I'm not sad. What's wrong with her, right? But I didn't realize it at the time. She was a lesbian, and I think she was preying on me.
Oh,
yeah.
No.
Yes. And so so after school, the bell rings. You know, I go, I'm waiting in the courtyard, and I'm just kind of sitting there by myself. And one of the guys from the rock band comes up, and he's like, hey, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm just trying to figure out why I'm depressed. And he goes, what? And I was like, well, my teacher said I'm depressed, and I'm just trying to figure out why. And he's like, I know why. And I was like, you do? He goes, yeah. He goes, can I pick you up tonight? I was like, okay. So he picked me up, and he took me to church. And so he told me at the time, it was the pastor who pioneered the church, right? And I was like, okay, so I'm there, and I'm in church, and I'm like, these people are weird. I'm like laughing, like, what are we doing here? And then when they started speaking in tongues, I couldn't help it. I busted out laughing. I was like, y'all are weird, Philip, you know? I don't know. I've never seen a church like this, you know? And so, so then the preaching started happening. I liked the music, though. I liked that, you know, I'm young, and I hated having to be quiet in church, and I would fall asleep, and my mom would pinch me, and despiertate, you know, it's like, it's boring, you know?
Yeah.
So I liked that I didn't have to be quiet. That was, you know, that was different. But what the pastor was preaching about that night was how we're born with a hole in our heart. And the only thing that can fill that hole it's a void, and it's only Jesus that is ever going to make you complete. And I was like, that's it. It's like, I'm doing everything and everything's good. It's just that I'm not complete because I don't have Jesus. Like, up until this point, I thought I did, right? I don't know why I thought I did, just that I had made decisions to not blatantly sin, I guess, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I was like, that's it. And so I went up and I got saved. And I was doing good for a good while. But I was so busy at school. It's like, and work and everything. My life was really busy that I wasn't attending church as much. And, I had my boyfriend, and he had come and he had gotten saved too. And then, just things happened in the relationship. And I just decided I'm going to follow him instead of,
God.
the church. And he didn't want to go back to the church. So that relationship, went south too. And so I was like, you know what? I want to go back to church. Like, that's when I was really, really happy. But I felt like, but I made these decisions, and I know Jesus will forgive me. I just don't feel right asking him to forgive me, It's like I feel like I would be taking advantage of the fact that he would forgive me. I didn't know that scripture, about, shall we sin so that grace may abound? And,
Yes,
what's the other one? Right now I can't even think of it, but it's kind of like, not taking advantage of God's grace.
Right.
And I didn't know that scripture, but that's how I felt in my heart. And so I wouldn't go back. And so I was like, well, if I'm going to be a sinner, man, I'm going to go to hell, I may as well jump head on into my sin. And I did. That's when my drinking got really, really heavy. For 2 years straight, I drank every single day. Not socially, I drank to pass out.
Oh, wow.
If I made it home and I was like awake, I had a big old bottle of NyQuil on my dresser, and I would just take a swig because I was so miserable because I knew I was going to go to hell. And so, if you would have looked at my life at that point, I had already graduated. I was a dance instructor. I was a professional dance instructor. I was making money, had a car. I was living on my own. I moved out at 16. And so I'm like, okay, I'm doing good if you would have looked at me by the world standards, right? But inside I was so miserable and I was so broken. And when I would go home, I'd be like, I know there's more to life than this. It wasn't like there's got to be more life. Sometimes I think there was like kind of like there's got to be more to what the world has to offer than this. Is probably more the sentiment. But I knew that there was more to life than this.
Yes.
But I just didn't want to. I felt like it would be offensive to me, to God, if I did that because I made my choice. It's kind of like I made my bed, I gotta lie in it, And so,
like punishing yourself, like
right,
yes,
right. And so, but God was so gracious; He would always reach out to me. And then there was actually the church was outreaching one day, and I don't know where they were. I don't know where I was. But one of these guys from the church, his name was Ray Felan, right? He comes up and he starts dealing with me, saying, not one step that you take is guaranteed. And I'm like, I know this, kind of like, whatever, I'm good, acting like if it wasn't bothering me. But I couldn't sleep after that. It's like I'd be like on a roller coaster or a carnival ride, and I'd be like, I'm going to fall off this thing, I'm going to die, I'm going to go to hell, I deserve this. We'd almost have a car accident, like, I'm going to die, I'm going to go to hell, I deserve it. It's like it wouldn't rest with me. And then I was, one of my friends, we were going to go downtown. We were going to go to North Star Mall. And so, we're on the south side, and I had my Camaro. But I was like, what, I haven't taken the bus since I was a little girl. Like, let's take the bus, right? And so she's like, okay. That must have been God appointed because we're downtown transferring and we're waiting for the bus. And the blocks downtown are pretty long, right? So we're right by the Majestic on Houston. And we're sitting there waiting, and this homeless man started walking towards us. Yeah, but he was a distance, like maybe like where the coat rack is over there. And like when I actually like, he caught my attention, but he was like, he looked like he was checking me out, right? And I wasn't saved. I wasn't dressed totally bad, but I wasn't dressed totally appropriate either.
Right.
And so I'm like getting offended that he's looking at me, right? Like, and I'm all like telling my friend, like, I'm gonna be attracted to this homeless man, really, He looked homeless. I don't know if he was or not, but anyways, when he got closer to me, like probably about where the end of the table is, his look completely changed. It just changed. And then he started walking directly at me. He's like, you used to be a Christian, right? And I was just like, yes.
Oh, my goodness.
And so he started telling me, Jesus wants you to go back to church. Why don't you go back to church? And so I started telling him, I was like, I want to go. Like in my heart, I want to serve God. I want to do this, but I just don't feel like it's right, And he sat down with me. He talked to me for a good while. And then I was telling him all about the door and how much I loved it and blah, 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 right? And so he's telling me, you need to go back. And I was like, it's not right. And so he got up and he goes, have you ever seen me before? And I said, no. He goes, I've never seen you a day before in my life. How did I know you were a Christian? Who do you think is talking to you? And he turned around and he walked away. And my friend's like, what a weirdo. And I turned around and I said, shut up, stupid. I was just that's the way I talked back then, right?
Yeah.
I tell my kids not to talk like that now. You know? It's funny because my homeschool students, I don't let them talk that, I don't let them say that word. And so
She said it on a podcast.
so even when I was giving them the testimony, they looked at me and said, that's the way I used to talk. It sounds ugly, right? It does, you know. But so anyways, so, you know, I just told her to be quiet, and then I looked back, and he was completely gone. And we were, like, in the middle of the block, so he couldn't have gone that fast, you know? And so I know that that was God. And it was very shortly after that that I went back to church. Actually was my dance studio. We're going to go teach lessons at a vacation resort in Colorado. And the day that we were leaving, something was telling me, he's like, you're going to go and you're going to die in your sin over there. And so I was like, so I called my boss, and he's the only man, because when you're in the entertainment industry, they do make you feel like they own you, you know? And he's the only man who could make me cry by getting after me over the phone, right? Besides my dad. And so, so back then, thank God we had payphones.
Yes.
And so we didn't have cell phones, so he couldn't call me back. So I called and I said, hey, I can't go. And he starts yelling, what do you mean you can't go? I said, scratch that. I'm not going. I quit, and I hung up. And so that night I went to church. And at that time, we didn't even have a building. It was actually the last, we had already gotten the building, but I didn't know. But it was the last service that we had when we were traveling around, meeting different places.
Yeah.
And so it was at the Plaza Party House. And we were having this service that night. It was a Wednesday night. It was March 14th of 1990. So I just hit 34 years saved. And I went and I gave my life to Jesus, and I just made a decision every day. It's like, I'm just going to serve God. If they were practicing, like a band was practicing their song service, I would just go sit there. If they were cleaning, I would go help. Just as like as long as I'm in church, I'm not getting myself into trouble.
Yeah.
And so, so that's what I did. And so
Just
every
threw
day.
yourself into it as much as you could. So how did it, when you got saved, how did the drinking, did you quit cold turkey or?
Instantaneously. Like I didn't even feel a desire, never felt a
Praise
desire,
God.
never. Yeah, it was like I always tell
delivered.
people, right, instantaneously. Like there was no 12-step program. There never even a struggle or a battle. I've never walked past alcohol or gone near alcohol, like at the grocery store or anything, where I felt a struggle, not once.
Okay. Praise God.
Was-
So I was going to say, when you went back, I know you said that you were like, oh, this isn't right. This isn't right. When you were there, going back to church, how did that feel, that first service that you were there? Did you feel like, was the devil condemning you still, or did you?
No, honestly, I was just like, Jesus, I don't care if I'm the dog eating the crumbs at the table. I just don't want to go to hell, and I don't want to live without you anymore.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, yeah.
So when you were heavily into your drinking, you said it was on your own and stuff. So did your family know like that you were that bad of an alcoholic?
No, they didn't, not at all. And even the dance studio that I worked for, I mean, I was underage, so like we would have where we would two times a month we would have like a party at the studio, and 2 times a month we would take the students out to the clubs dancing, so that they could get practice maneuvering around people and stuff, right? So I was underage, so lots of times the clubs would say, sorry, she can't go in. So I would end up going home, you know. But then lots of times they said I could. And so while we were there working, like we were getting paid on the clock, they paid for us to get in, they paid for anything we wanted while we were there. And so they wouldn't card me, like they would card me to go in.
But they wouldn't card you for the drinks.
Right. So my boss knew that I was drinking heavily. He knew I was driving home. Even at the studio when we would have the parties there, I would drink a lot, and they would just let me. And I remember one time I couldn't find my glasses, and I drove home, you know, drunk without my glasses, and just like I couldn't tell. Like I just remember like in and out, like looking like, okay, am I inside the lines? Like trying to look over the window because I couldn't see, but I could see here.
Yeah.
You know, and so it was not good.
So, okay, so with those years between, so I guess, hold on. So you were at about 19 maybe when you got saved?
Yes.
Completely, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so from 14 to 19, the decisions that you made in those times with the drinking and whatever else that you did, do you think that it would have played out differently if your parents didn't get divorced?
Would the drinking have played out differently?
Just any other anything that happened between those 5 years that, if you look back now, that if it was, you know, sinful stuff. So if it was the drinking and
Definitely. I think the drinking would have played out later. It's funny because my mom had me like in the arts and in the entertainment. Like she was like wanted me to be a little star. My dad wanted me to be an attorney. And so he would be like, okay, you have these talents and stuff, but you have a brain. And you need to use that brain because this is all going to fade, looks, all that. He's like, all that fades. You need to develop your brain. So, so I definitely think it would have been different. Plus, he had instilled the fear of God in us. We had a respect and a fear of him at the same time. So I definitely think while I was in the house, I maybe wouldn't have gotten into things as young. But because of family curses, I can't say that it wouldn't have happened. You know what I'm saying? So,
well, you had said.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say you had said that you would run away. Do you think you would have had run away if your mom didn't divorce him?
I think I would have. By the time I spoke to my mom about it, I had already well thought it out, and I think I would have left.
What was your plan?
I don't remember at this point.
Okay.
I think I don't know. I think it was just to leave, but I know I wasn't going to go with family or any friends that they knew.
Oh, okay.
Because I wouldn't want them to be able to find me because I was afraid if my dad found me.
Yeah.
Yeah. He would have felt like, hey, that was like a really offensive thing and like a shame to me in what you did, and so yeah.
So you said you moved out at 16 though, right? On your own. So what happened with that situation? Like you just were done with living with your mom?
My mom remarried and her husband, he's a great man. It's like we've grown to really, really love him, but we didn't know him. And he came into our house and, he tried to like ground me from the phone. I'm like, hey, that's my dad's phone. It's like, you're grounded from the phone. You can't use the phone. Don't tell me I'm grounded for the phone. You're in my dad's house, kind of a thing, right? Even though I'm the one who didn't want my dad there, right? It's just a rebel. I was just a rebel.
Teenager.
I always tell my mom, I'm surprised he didn't leave you because of me. And she's like, oh, he almost did, And I was the most vocal. I can say I got the most spankings in the house, right? And it's like, I remember maybe 2 times that my oldest sister got spanked. My middle sister never got spanked. Because they had a boy after me. He could get away with murder, right? But me, but I can say honestly, like I deserved every single spanking that I got except for one.
Yeah.
And when I went to my dad later, I told him, you spanked me for this and it wasn't right, and this is why it wasn't right. He apologized,
Yeah.
And so.
But you were the strong-willed one.
Yes,
you were the strong-willed one.
Definitely. I was, yes. And I always thought that I was more like my dad, which my dad was very strong-willed, and he always taught us, like, if you're right, you defend yourself no matter what. Don't let people make you back down. So what in my book, that applied to him too, right? It's like,
that's what you taught me.
Right. And he would tell me, every time I deal with you, I know exactly how my bosses feel.
Okay, so you didn't know this guy and you just were like, I'm not going to live here anymore.
Yeah, well, it wasn't so much that, it wasn't that quick either. It's just like, kind of like, okay, I'm making all this money. It's like, okay, I grew up mentally very fast. It's like I wasn't somebody out on the street, but I experienced a lot at a very young age. I did a lot, some of it good, some of it bad, right? And so I felt like at that point in my life, I felt like I was too mature to be living under their rules, and I was making a great amount of money. I could, support myself very well. And I thought it's better if I just go because I'm going to do what I want, and it's going to cause problems here. And I don't feel like they have a right to tell me that I can't do it. So I moved out, and it was fine. Like, it wasn't ugly when I moved out or anything. Now that I'm a mom, my oldest son that I bore, he moved out when he was 19. 3 minutes down the road, and I fell apart completely. What a meltdown.
You're like, no, my baby.
And I would tell myself he's 3 minutes down the road living with guys that were in church and everything, right?
Yeah.
But still, so now I know what I did to my mom,
Yes, yeah.
I didn't realize how much of everything I did was affecting her. She was very good at not having a meltdown or breaking down in front of me or anything, She would just pray. She wasn't saved, but she loved God, and she would pray. She was, raised Catholic. And so,
yeah. And your dad, how did he feel about you moving out on your own? Was he worried for you?
I didn't even ever ask. I don't know.
Okay.
At that point, I still was not I didn't care for my dad at that point. I would see him or whatever. But it wasn't until I got saved where I entered into a relationship with my dad again. Pastor Ruby preached this powerful sermon. I'll never forget it. It was called Man Haters. And so, I'm at the altar and I'm crying and I'm fighting with God. It's like, I don't want to forgive him. He doesn't deserve my forgiveness, kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. And then I believe it was Heather Anderson. She always had this like way of speaking into my life. And she didn't know what I was going through.
Yeah.
And she just came up and she put her arm around me and she said, what you bind on heaven and what you bind on earth is bound in heaven. And she said, if you don't forgive, the very person you're not forgiving may never be able to make it to heaven because you've bound them in your unforgiveness. And I just like, whoa, I was like, okay, I don't want him to go to hell. I don't want anybody to go to hell. I'm crying. I was like, okay, fine, I'll forgive him,
Yeah.
But I'm so glad I did. I'm so grateful that I did, because after that, and even then I had my bouts where I was mad at him still, because after I forgave him, then I started really trying to reach out to him, right? And like witness to him and stuff. So one night he's drunk and he's at my house and I'm witnessing to him. And he would tell me stuff like, Ruby, it's not what goes into a man. I'm dealing with him about drinking. It's not what goes into a man that defiles him. It's what comes out of a man's mouth. I said, in that case, you're still in a lot of trouble,
Right, yeah.
You need to get saved. But one night he tells me, Mija, there's nothing you can tell me about Jesus or the Bible that I don't already know. He said, I used to be a Christian. I was called to preach. I used to preach on the radio. And I think he thought I was going to be happy. But I got so mad. I was so angry. And I was like, you mean I didn't have to have the upbringing that I had? I didn't have to be a child of divorce. I didn't have to see you hit mom. I didn't have to,
a drunk dad.
Look at how your decisions played out in our lives. And I started telling him, this is what I've done. This is what my sister's done. This is what my brother's done because of your decisions, Dad. I started telling him, you're a selfish man. And I was mad. And he started weeping and he left that night, just crying, Mm-hmm. And so I think, when you're making your decisions, you don't think, 20, 30 years down the line, my kid's going to say, look at what you've done to me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I always tell, especially fathers, is like, make sure that what you're doing, you're not going to be sorry for later, because your kids are going to call you on it later,
Yes, yeah.
And so, still God, I had to forgive again, right? And I so thank God, because I entered into a 20-year relationship with my dad where I was daddy's little girl again. And for 20 years, I prayed for my dad. God, I don't care if it's on his deathbed. Just please don't let him go to hell.
Just take him, yeah.
Yeah, give him a chance to repent. So he got cancer, and I would tell people, "Oh, thank God, my dad got cancer."
He's gonna get saved.
Yes,
he's gonna get saved.
And they would be like, "You're so morbid." I'm like, "No, you don't understand. Like, my dad should have died any day of his life in a barroom brawl or a DWI accident, instantaneously." Like my dad, I was like, "It's God's grace. He got cancer, and he lived for 8 months battling the cancer." And at that time, we were pastoring in Harlingen, and if I could spend 30 minutes with him, I would drive 4 hours spend the 30 minutes with him and 4 hours back.
Wow.
Yeah, so I could be with my dad.
Yes.
And he did get saved. I thank God. Like, we prayed with him. Pastor Ruby prayed with him. So many people prayed with him. Some people, he'd be like, "You're not Pastor Ruby, go away," Because even though he wasn't saved, he loved Pastor Ruby.
Yes.
And so, I thank God. And so I fully believe. I remember my sister, she would tell me, "Ruby, I don't know if I believe what you believe, but if you're right, Dad needs to get saved. He's a sinner." I'm like, "So are you,
You're next. Yeah. I'm praying for you next.
But so when he died, she asked me, "Do you think he made it to heaven?" And I said, "I don't know." I said, "I know God's grace goes a long way."
Yes.
I believe that he was repentant. I said, "But then he said things after he prayed that, I don't know, right?" I hope so. I said, "But I rest in this, that if he did not make it to heaven, God gave him every opportunity."
Right.
And so I said, "But I do believe that he made it,
Yeah.
But so, but could I answer it like for sure? I don't know who can, right?
Right. Yes.
And
yes.
so yeah. And
how was your relationship with your mom after you started going to church?
At first, she didn't like it because she was very much, you don't leave the Catholic Church. And her family, we are the typical Mexican family where everybody would get together at grandma's on Sunday, and we had caldo or menudo. And so when I started getting there late because, I was at church, and then leaving early, because I was at church.
Gotta go again.
Right.
Yes, yeah.
They started getting upset, and my mom would think, you're going too much. You're going too much. But she would see but I'm not having problems with you anymore. You know what I mean? But she was afraid I was in a cult. And so they didn't like it. Even my grandmother told me, I don't know, do y'all understand Spanish?
Very little. She does.
Okay. Well, I'll say it in Spanish and then I'll say it in English for y'all. My grandmother would tell me, te están lavando la mente. Like, hey, they're brainwashing you.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
And I'd say, pues qué bueno, grandma, porque mi mente necesita una buena lavada. And it's like, well, good, because my brain needs a good washing. And
It
she would
needs
just
to be
laugh.
cleaned. Yes.
And so, you know, they didn't like it at first, but, you know, they learned to deal with it, right? And then it's just, they realize it's a part of life. And I think later my mom was grateful.
Mm-hmm.
My mom did end up getting saved later, not in our church. She lives in a small town in a little Baptist church in her town. And she was known like as the church rebel because she like always challenged the pastor, like, show me where it says you can't lose your salvation. You can, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, yeah.
That's good.
Well, good. She knew her scripture.
Yeah.
That's good. And then, okay, so you're in the church, you're jumping into
Involved.
everything, you know, as much as you can. We didn't really go into Ray's story
I talk
during
faster.
salvation. So, I mean, you can kind of touch on that a little bit because we know that you guys obviously didn't get married. He had a wife before you.
Right.
So, were you married before?
I was.
Okay. And somebody in the church as well?
Was in the church, but somebody who I guess I didn't want to acknowledge that wasn't doing well in the church, and I was advised not to marry. I did in rebellion. Still, like, not wanting to leave church or anything like that. I just, like, no, I think I know what I'm doing, and went ahead and got married. And I regretted it. You know, I should have listened, kind of a thing. It was not a good marriage. It was not good. And very soon after we got married, he stopped going to church altogether. And so I think even that made being stuck in this, like, okay, now I made a decision that I can't just walk out of, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You have to stick through it.
Right. And so that made Jesus and salvation even more real to me, because it's like, okay, it's like I got here out of my own not listening to good counsel. I'm going to listen to everything they tell me to do now.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, you know, it's like sometimes I have to learn the hard way, but when I learn, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I did, and I thank God for the church and for my headship, Pastor and Yolanda. They walked me through a very difficult marriage, a very difficult divorce. And then walked me through my singlehood and my courtship with my husband now, and everything. So I really thank God for them. But like I said, when I learn, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah.
How long did that marriage last?
5 years.
5 years.
Yeah.
Okay. So I was going to say, can you give us some, because I know there's been some other testimonies, like Miss Jessica Alfado, when she was saved, and Pastor Alfado Daniel Alfado was coming against her. He wasn't saved, and so he was coming against her and the problems that they kind of went through. Did you kind of go through that, where you were still coming to church, you were still saved, and there was that resistance and
From my first
from your
husband?
first husband?
No, he didn't give me any resistance. He wanted me to be saved, you know. 'Cause, if I'm saved, then I'm not a problem to him, right?
Oh, okay, okay.
And so, yeah, you know, he gave me absolutely no resistance. The only part where he would give me resistance was tithing.
Oh, okay.
It's
and
money gets
yeah.
given away. He's like, why
Okay.
you give my money away?
Right. That was it. No, it was just that he didn't want to live right. He wasn't faithful,
Was
he
he
was not good to me.
was he doing stuff? Was he drinking or and that kind of stuff?
I don't know that he was drinking, but he was going out to the clubs and he was seeing women and stuff.
Okay.
Okay, so he was cheating on you?
Yeah.
Is that why their marriage ended?
Yes, in the long run, yes. It's like I gave him time to try to, because he wanted to reconcile, but with everything he had done, I was like, I'm not just going to take you back. You're going to have to prove your way back, you know.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so I was like, you know, if you want to reconcile, we can do this. We're going to date for 6 months. You will pay my rent and my bills, and we will date and we'll see how it goes, you know. And so within that time, I would find evidence of him seeing other girls and stuff. And so I didn't say anything, wouldn't fight with him about it. At that time, I wasn't allowing him to touch me. So then when his 6 months was up, he was like, okay, I can move back in. I was like, no, you can't. I was like, you know, I found this evidence and that evidence. And he's like, well, I'm not going to pay your rent and your bills for another 6 months. I said, you do what you have to do. I told him, I am prepared to live married as a single person the rest of my life. God hates divorce, and I will not file. So you do what you have to do, you know. And so he did file, and down to, you know, the night before, and even at the courtroom, you know, you could see that he was not really wanting it. It was like, I guess there was inner turmoil about it. And even there, I told him, we can postpone this, you know. It's like, because he was crying. And he was like, no. And I was like, okay, you know, that's fine. And so he actually didn't even go into the courtroom. He left. He was upset. And so I went in myself and finished the proceedings there. Yeah.
Do you think that was like the Holy Spirit convicting him? Because obviously you were praying for him. You know what I mean? You had already prepared your heart that, hey, if I need to be married and single, like, I'm not going to do it. Like you said, I'm not going to divorce you. Do you think that was the Holy Spirit kind of drawing on him, giving him, because you gave him that chance of, we don't have to do this. We can postpone it. Do you think that's why he was,
I don't know, honestly, where he was spiritually at that point. I don't know. I will say that he has come back to church recently. And I don't know where he's at there either, you know. So I'm not sure, honestly.
Did you have a kid with him?
No,
No kids.
I would not.
okay.
But before it all went down.
Well, because it was only you said a few months, right? After you guys were married?
Yeah, well, not a few months, maybe almost a year after we were married.
Oh, okay.
But no, I didn't even like kids back then. Like, honestly, I got kicked out of nursery.
Oh,
I was like, they're begging for nursery workers, and they kicked me out because I didn't like kids. It was like, people would come pick up their kids at the nursery, and I'd be like, hey, your kid's a brat. Have you spanked him? Here's your brat. Spank your brat, you know. And so I'd walk in with my other nursery workers, and I'd be like, I don't change diapers, and I don't feed. I play. And then when I think it was Diane Galeno said, somebody get this brat out of here. You know? But I was not raised to be domestic in any way, shape, or form. I never had dolls, nothing. It's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Yeah. So
Too busy learning how to box.
how to box and how to run a business. I wish I was going to be a tycoon shark.
Oh, how funny.
Yeah, as a little girl.
Okay, well, I mean, I guess that makes the divorce cleaner and not so messy.
Yeah.
Okay, so then after that, where does Pastor Ray come into the picture after that?
So, okay, funny thing is, y'all didn't get into it with him, but I thought he was my brother, like for a long time, because his uncle was my next door neighbor. We went to the same Catholic church, and we danced for the same flamenco studio, and we never knew each other, right? He says on the other side of the tracks. I don't know, like we didn't live far from each other, but we had never seen each other. We didn't know each other.
Yeah, but you guys were in the same area.
All the time.
Neighborhood, yeah.
Yeah. And so when I started working at the mall, he said that he saw me there at the mall, but that he thought I was stuck up. I don't know. I never noticed him, you know.
Yeah.
He said, see, you were, right? I don't know. I didn't know him until we got into the church both as teenagers, and we were just like friends. When I came back at 19, he came shortly after me, and because he was in the military, he had gone into the military, and then he came, but he was married now with his first wife, and so she and I became very good friends, and so he and I were like brother and sister, but I really did think he was my brother because I'm like, why didn't we know each other? They didn't want us to know each other, you know. And
She's all conspiracy.
Right, I am a conspiracy theorist in some things, but not like aliens or anything weird, but JFK stuff, right?
Yes. Oh. Funny that you.
Right? So one time even my dad was at my apartment and Ray and Josie were there, and I'm like, hey, Dad. They're dealing with the kids or whatever. I tell them, hey, sometimes I think Ray's my brother because he even has mannerisms like my brother. And, you know, he's short, like my family were short. You know, just different things. Like we were involved in all the same, you know, theater and everything. So I'm like, he's got to be my brother. So when I asked my dad scratches his head and he's like, maybe. I was so mad. I was like, that means right before I was conceived, you were cheating on Mom, you know. So he's like, I just said maybe. I don't know, you know.
There's a possibility.
So fast forward, when we were going to be married. He wanted to get married. I was like, you need to take a blood test because I don't want to find out you're my brother after
married,
kids.
right?
Yeah. And so he did. And if he ever gets to that story, I'll let him tell that story. He tells it much better than I do. But yeah.
Okay.
That's funny. So, okay, so when you guys ended up getting married, how far into your salvation were you at that point?
So we got married in 2000, and so 10 years into my salvation.
Okay.
When I come back.
Okay, and so during those 10 years or at any point, had you seen yourself being a pastor's wife?
You know, it's funny. I never was one of those like, I want to be a pastor's wife or I'm called to be a pastor's wife. Never. But I remember one time my sister and my mom talking with me, and it was after I was single again. And we're at my sister's house, and they're like, you know, you take this way too serious. And I don't know, it must have been Holy Ghost because it never was anything that I would speak about. But I was like, oh, you ain't seen nothing yet. One day I'm going to be a missionary, you know. It's like I'm going to go to a foreign nation to tell people about Jesus. And so they didn't think anything of it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So fast forward in 2013, we're leaving to Brazil, and they're boo-hooing. And I'm like, I told y'all, you know, like a long time ago, this is going to happen, you know.
Yeah.
And but I think they just thought, okay, Ruby, you know, whatever.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
So my husband and I, we were never ones to talk about like, oh, when we get sent out or nothing. Our kids would talk about it. They'd be like, when we get sent out, you know, we just wanted to see people saved, and we were just always doing things to see people saved. You know, we were in bands and dramas and outreaches. We would outreach our neighborhood. You know, we just wanted people to know Jesus. But never talked about being sent out. So
When was the first time you guys went to go pioneer?
in 2006, we went to Houston.
Okay. And so how was that whole experience?
It was an experience. We were pioneering. I loved Houston. Houston's really easy to get sucked into, though, with Life Right, but that didn't happen with us. I loved Houston, but we had older kids in Houston, and what I found, at least in the area that we were in, we were very close to the Woodlands. We were like in the Tomball Spring area.
Okay.
And so what I found was that the kids were very unruly, and they knew the system, and the authorities were on the kid's side, not on the parents' side. And so you know, our kids went to public school, and so they learned a few tricks and stuff. And so for me, Houston was very difficult in that respect as far as our older kids. But I loved pioneering. I loved being in Houston. I think where we were at, it probably would have worked better to have a Spanish church, because for Houston, we were too Mexican.
Oh, okay.
And then when we went to the valley, we were too white.
Yes, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
And then when we went to Brazil, we were American, and that's all they cared about, right? But I mean, the church was great. Like, we really had, ironically enough, though we were struggling with our teenagers, we really had impact with a lot of teenagers. And
Nice.
so, yeah.
How long were you guys there for?
We were there for 3 years, and then we were asked to take over Harlingen. And I was getting my kids' big old swing set with the rock climbing thing and all that.
Yes.
It was getting put up that day. Like, the workers were on their way to my house when my husband calls me, and he's like, Pastor wants us to take over Harlingen. I was like, you're kidding, right? He's like, no, like, my swing set's being put up. Are you sure?
Can we take it with us?
We did.
Did you?
Yes. So I had to call the guys. It's like, don't put it up, you know?
Yeah, I'm like, we'll put it up over there.
Yeah. So we left, I think, within 2 weeks. I think we were gone.
Wow,
And we
that
were
was,
in
okay, it was a fast one.
It was a fast one. It was an emergency takeover.
Yes, yeah.
Is it a small town?
Harlingen?
I don't know that.
It is. It's small. It's kind of feels like the south side of San Antonio, or like one area of San Antonio.
Okay, so then it was definitely a big difference from the whole Houston
Yes,
dynamic.
big difference. It was so boring at first when we got there. I was like, there was so much to do in Houston, right?
Yes.
And so there was this place in Houston called It's a pizza place. It's a buffet, and they have like Fiesta Texas-sized rides in there. And so
We had one in Albuquerque. Do you remember?
It's?
Yeah.
Okay, that's awesome, right?
Yeah.
So we moved to Harlingen, and there's nothing. I literally called, I kid you not, I called its corporate office, and I was like,
Can you
hey,
please put one?
So I've been doing some numbers myself, and if you put one in Wessico, you will get McAllen, Wessico, Harlingen and Brownsville, you know.
And there's
so,
nothing else like you guys.
Yes, nothing. I
No
was like-
competition.
and ironically, they told me, you know, we've been looking at the Valley, but that they were looking at Harlingen. But it turned out that Bass Pro Shop bought the area that they were looking at.
That's
Yeah.
So they didn't come in.
No.
She's like, I got the numbers for you
And
folks.
for me, I would
Y'all
take
doing research analysis.
Yes. And for me, I would take the kids to Bass Pro Shop, but it was so boring to just go look at those fish. You
Yeah,
know, I'm not into fishing, so
How long were you guys there for?
we were there for 4 years.
Okay.
Yeah, and then Pastor Ruby asked us about wanting to go overseas, and so we went to Brazil.
Okay.
Okay.
So tell us about, I know you've told us before when we've had lunch together, but I want her story for Brazil and the stuff you guys kind of went through with your health.
Oh, wow. Okay. So it's such a long story. I'll try to make it not too long. So Pastor Ruby and Ray, they were talking about China, and the conversation kept turning towards Brazil. And so Ray was literally in the office all week of conference. Like, I'd be sitting there by myself all week. He comes like, what happened? What happened? Yeah.
Fill me in.
Yes. And so finally on Thursday, I think it was Thursday, he said, we've been talking about China, but we keep flipping to Brazil. What do you think about going to Brazil? And I said, to me, that's logical. Because he would literally put in prayer requests ever since Joseph was in the hospital for Brazil, you know. Mm-hmm. So every service we would hear, pray for Brazil, pray for Brazil. And so I was like, you've been praying for Brazil for so long, it's logical, you know, for us to go. So let's go. So he went, okay. So then Pastor Ruby said, okay, y'all need to figure out where in Brazil. So we go to we're staying in the hotel because we're at a conference. And so we're there. And he's looking at the map, and he's looking at Rio, Sao Paulo, Fortaleza. And he's like, I do not feel God speaking to me at all. And so I said, why don't you open up the rest of the map and let's look at the south? And so he opened it up, and the first thing he saw was Joinville. We thought it was Joinville. They pronounce it Joinville. And so he went down one way and to the left the other way, and he knew two pastors that would be directly in other nations, but directly across from us both ways. Mm-hmm. And he's like, I really do feel like God's speaking to me about Joinville. And so I was like, well, let's do it. So he goes and he talks to Pastor Ruby, and Pastor Ruby looks it up real quick, and he's like, where'd you find this? This is Europe. This is not Brazil, you know. He's like, it looks European. And it was settled by the Italian and the Germans. So they announced us to Joinville. So we go, and we're there. We're in the hotel. We're there with our two boys, 27 pieces of luggage, and just trying to negotiate just to get to the hotel, because they say that if you know Spanish, that Portuguese is easy, but
it's not.
Words don't mean the same.
Yeah.
Like, you could have the same word, but it'll mean something totally different. You know, and it's not the same at all.
Yeah.
So finally, after about over an hour, I think, of negotiating, we got 4 cabs to get us to the hotel with all our luggage and our boys. And we're there. And so we start looking for a place, you know, trying to figure out the language, how to order food, all this stuff, right? So we're there, and we go look at an apartment, and it's a nice apartment. I really love this apartment. And so because we're foreigners, the realty company is requiring that we have a year's deposit. So we had to have a year's worth of rent put down just as deposit.
Dang.
So we're like, okay. So Ray talks to Pastor Ruby, and Pastor Ruby says, okay. So he sends the money. The bank, I guess, wired it to the realty company, but it's social. It's a socialized country. So the Federal Bank of Brazil stopped the money.
Because it was such a big amount.
Right, but we didn't know. And so for like a month, we're like, where's the money? Pastor Ruby's asking, Ray, did y'all get the money? We're like, we haven't gotten the money. The realty company hasn't got the money. We don't know where the money is. And so it's a month already, and so we lose the apartment. So we find another apartment that they put on hold for us. Finally, after about another couple of weeks, the Federal Bank of Brazil, they contact the realty company, say, we have all this money, what's it for? And they said, we're requiring it of the foreigners. And they submitted the contracts, right, the rental contracts. And so they sit on it for another couple of weeks, and then they say, we don't accept this money, we're sending it back to the States. So they send the money back, so we lose the second apartment.
Oh, no.
Yes, so at this point, we're like, we'll just take any apartment, we don't care, you know.
Because you're living in a hotel.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And their double room is 2 twin-size beds. So there's 4 of us on 2 twin-size beds. Right.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, it wasn't comfy.
Yeah.
And so we were there for a total of 3 months in the hotel. So we find the other apartment, and they Western Union. Pastor Ruby said, we're going to Western Union the money to y'all, but it took a while, right?
Yeah.
Because it's in increments. So, so we get it, and we get the apartment, and we're all settled in and stuff. We fix it up. It was a very nice apartment. I mean, for crying out loud, I'm in a third world country, right? It's like, it just wasn't like the first apartment.
Yeah. You're
but
like,
it was
oh,
it was a
man.
nice apartment. Like, there was no complaints, So a year and a half later, I get up in the morning because I need to go to the bathroom, and I take 2 steps out of bed and I collapse. So backtrack a little bit. We had gotten scabies. We were working with some homeless people, and they came to church, and I was so excited that they came to church, and I knew nothing about scabies that I hugged the girl. Well, if I would have known about scabies, I would not have touched her, because now that I know, it was all over her skin. Like, you could see the scabies on her. But I didn't know anything about it, so I hugged her. Then I started waking up kind of like itchy with a lump here. And we had just gotten a puppy, and I'm like, this dog is giving us something, Turned out we gave the dog scabies. Right? But so we had taken my husband, when he bought some cream, and then he bought oral medicine for us. And so we had taken the oral medicine the night before for the first time. So I collapsed, and I'm like, I can move my right side, but I can't move my left side. I was falling over on my left side, and I was like, it must be an allergic reaction to the medicine, right? I was like, you know what? It's 6 a.m. I'll just wait till he wakes up for prayer, and then, he can help me up.
So you're on the floor thinking this.
And I'm thinking this. And then out of nowhere, he just wakes up, Ruby. It's like God woke him up, because he starts calling out for me, and he's like, where are you? And I'm like, I'm okay, I'm down here. And I told him I was going to the bathroom, and he said that right away. He was like, Ruby doesn't like to function in the dark. Like, I'll go turn on all the lights. I don't like the dark,
Yeah.
And he's like, the lights are off. So he gets up, and he looks at me, he turns on the light, and he's like, what's wrong? And I said, I think I'm having an allergic reaction. He goes, Ruby, you're having a stroke. I was like, no, I'm not. He goes, I'm calling the ambulance. I was like, you better not. That's embarrassing. I was like, I am not having a stroke. If I was having a stroke, how could I reason with you that I'm not having a stroke? I'm not. Don't do this. And so he's like, I'm calling the ambulance. So he picked me up. He put me on the bed. He woke up my son. He's like, you need to watch her. And he's like, and whatever you do, don't give her water, because I was paralyzed, so I could choke, right?
Yes, yeah.
So I'm asking my son, like, give me a drink of water. And he's like, no, ma'am. He's all militant with his hand behind his back. No, ma'am. I was like, I said, give me some water, kid.
He's still being respectful,
Yes.
But he's all, nope.
And I'm getting mad. Like, I said, give me some water, And he's like, no. I said, I am your mother. You will give me some water. And he's like, my father said not to. Like, oh. And he's like, no, ma'am, I will not. And I thought, you insolent little boy. I was getting mad at him. And so the whole time I'm like, there is no way I'm having a stroke. Look at how well I can think, right?
Right.
So he prepares some stuff, and then he calls one of the guys from the church, and he's like, look, I can't do the Portuguese thing right now. My wife is having a stroke, and we need an ambulance. So he's like, okay, Pastor, I'll call. So he calls, and then he calls right back. But by the time he's already called back, the lights are going, and we hear the siren. Well, he heard the siren. I didn't hear it. And so he calls back. He's like, Pastor, it's Brazil. It's going to take a long time. He goes, they're here. And he goes, they're there? He's like, they're here. So they come in. They come with their gurney, right? And they're going to get me. I'm like, I don't need y'all. Y'all can leave in Portuguese.
She's trying to kick him out.
And so they go, oh, okay. And so they start leaving because they're all pacifists, right? Because they're not going to argue with me. Oh, okay. And then he's like, don't listen to her. She needs to go to the hospital. He's like, okay. So they put me on the bed. Well, so we go through the elevator, and I remember glimpses of being in the elevator, being in the lobby, like in the front of the apartment complex. And I remember like one glimpse of being in the ambulance. But he says, I didn't know I was passing out. Like, I was going in and out of
in and out,
consciousness. And so we get to the hospital. Well, that apartment was around the corner, 5 blocks down from the best stroke hospital in the entire nation of Brazil. And so so we get there. There's 2 regional doctors, that top neurologists in the region, and they speak English. And it's social medicine, so medicine's not readily available, because if there's nobody to pay for the medicine, guess what? There's no medicine, right?
Yeah.
So they're telling him they don't know if I'm going to live or die. And then a nurse or a doctor runs in and says, we got a dose of the medicine. And so they just told him, you need to just sign, because if you don't, you're going to lose this dose. Somebody will end up signing for it. Yeah. And we don't have time to go into what could happen to her. So he says that he just went in the name of Jesus, and he signed it. So they gave me the medicine. So strokes are time sensitive. They say that if you, at least that's what I was told, that if you have your stroke in your sleep, you die. And if you don't get the medicine, if you're not treated within 3 hours, that you either remain paralyzed or you die. So by the time they gave me the dose, from the time that I woke up to go to the bathroom, it had 22 minutes left for that 3 hours.
Oh, wow.
As close as we were to the hospital.
And it was only one, the medicines.
The only
There's
one,
only one.
right. And so they have me in this room, like in my hospital room, with 7 other stroke victims. There's stroke victims lined up in the hallway on beds, you know. And so, you know, I had to watch them like they didn't recover from the paralysis, you know.
Yeah.
And feeling bad for them. And then at the same time thinking what a wretch I am, because I wouldn't want to give them the medicine either. I'm glad I got the medicine, you know.
Yeah.
And I know it was God's grace on my life, you know.
Yes, yes.
But watching them struggle through it, it hurt.
Yeah.
But then feeling hypocritical because I don't know if I would give it up for them. You know what I mean?
Yes, yes.
Kind of thing. So I don't know. It was something just that I wrestled with there in the hospital myself. So yeah, it was an ordeal. The hospital in itself, it should have been condemned. The building was horrible, but the medical staff was very well trained, very well trained. And even like some of the tests that they did on me, like there's one, they call it the bubble test. They just did it here recently on me just to check me to
Before
make sure
you
that I'm
leave.
okay. And it's a bubble test, so they put air bubbles in your vein. And I had never heard of that as a test in, you know, the medical field.
Yes.
So when they told me that in Brazil, I'm like, hey, that's the way they kill people in the movies back home. You know?
Right.
And they go, oh, you need 10 cc's for that. I'm like, well, how many are you giving me? 7. I'm like, that's too close. You know? So I'm there on the bed like, God, don't let me die a guinea pig, you know.
They're putting air.
Yes, in my veins. So, but so, you know, I went through all that. And then a couple of days later, I don't know how many days, honestly, it was. But when finally, it looks like I'm recovering, Ray tells me, Pastor said we did a good job and we can go home. And I was like, what about the church? Like, I'm not ready to just leave them, you know. And so we actually tried to stay that conference because we knew that we were going to get kicked out, or the chances were very high we'd get kicked out of the country.
Right, because you're leaving and you're not going to get back.
Right. And so, so because of visa issues and stuff like that. And so we're like, no, Pastor, like, let us stay. Things are going very well over here. You know, like, we don't want to leave. But he was concerned about me. So he's like, no, I need to see how Ruby's doing. So they took us home for conference. And when we were at the airport, they slapped us with fees and told us that we couldn't re-enter for like 6 months or something. And so, yeah.
Oh, wow.
That was it.
So then that was it. You never went back?
No, we never went back. And
So all your stuff was just in the apartment?
Well, because we had an idea, we packed a lot of the stuff,
Okay.
but I'm very sad. Like, I was working on one of my son's scrapbooks, and I didn't go in and get a bunch of his pictures. And so, you know, that probably, out of everything that we left, everything else was replaceable but those, you know.
Yeah.
So how long were you guys in Brazil?
In Brazil, we were there for 2 years.
For 2 years. Okay.
Yeah.
So, so then how did did you have people in the church at that time?
Mm-hmm.
And so how did they take it when you guys just didn't show up?
No, like when we left, no, they knew we were coming for conference. So they were trying to come to conference too. A bunch of them were trying to come, but they didn't get allowed they didn't get the visa to go. So when I had the stroke right away, they were like, y'all aren't going to leave us, are y'all? You know? But by that time, conference was a few months out, and I was recovering and recuperating. I was walking a little bit faster. It's funny because if I didn't practice a song on the keyboard, I couldn't play it. And so, like, he thought that, like, we could just go in and play, and I couldn't. My fingers just weren't moving that. My left hand wasn't doing it, you know. And so the first song service back was horrible, and he realized we need to practice. Like, yes, I mean, we would practice, not that we didn't, you know.
No,
what I mean?
yeah, but especially
just
after
the way
this
things worked
ordeal,
out.
yeah.
He was like, I'd rather you just rest, and then we'll just go, you know.
Yeah.
So they were very concerned after the stroke that I was going to leave, or that we were going to leave, but they weren't expecting it. And we did tell them, like, there's a chance that we won't be able to come back. But so what they did, 2 of the disciples, he very wise, I think God, another thing that God ordained was that before we left, he had an NP night, a new preacher night. And so 2 of the disciples preached. So that church was on its own without a pastor for 4 months. And those two disciples kept it going. They took turns
Praise
preaching.
God.
The church was growing at that time. They were doing very well. He was pastoring them from here, Pastor Ruby was sending them the money for like the rent for the church and all that stuff, So it all worked out really well. And then Richard and Linda Lance got announced to go. They went. And they took over the church for us.
Nice.
So, yeah.
So it's still going.
It's still going. It's now by a Colombian. I think the guy is Colombian and the wife is Brazilian.
Okay.
And that church just now got registered to be able to invite other people in. Because when you go into another nation, if you go in to start a church, you have to have an invitation from a church that's willing to be responsible for you. When you're the first couple in the nation, nobody knows you. And we actually did have a church that was going to do it for us. But right at the last minute, the council all rebelled against the pastor and left the church. So they were all the ones who had signed the paperwork.
Yes, yeah.
So, yeah. So.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then, so when you guys came back from Brazil, is that when you went to being an evangelist?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's Pastor Ruby said, I'm going to make you an evangelist. He did tell him that you need to get a job because, it's hard, especially getting started. But from the very first time that we got sent out to Houston, when he would preach in other churches, his preaching just took on a different dynamic. And I would tell him, I think you're supposed to be an evangelist. And he would tell me, no way, I don't want to leave the family. No,
Yeah. And
I was like, okay, but as I'm telling you, this is what I really feel like your preaching's just different, And so it took all of that, right? To now we're back and pastor's like, I'm going to make you an evangelist. And we prayed about it. It's like nobody wants a part-time evangelist, right? No job is going to give him, a couple of weeks off a month to go preach somewhere.
Yes, yeah.
And, people want a week-long revival, right? So we prayed, and so we set out a fleece before God, and he answered our fleece. And so we said, you know what, we're just going to step out and, believe God, and God has been very faithful.
Praise God.
Yes,
Good.
yeah, it's been very good. So it was an adjustment, though,
Of course,
Yeah.
because he's gone, and then he's back, and then he's gone, and so
Right.
You miss him.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
And now here you guys going to be doing the missionary
Another
work again.
adventure.
Yes,
Another
yes.
adventure.
So, I mean, it kind of seems like you guys, both of you you're just following the path, the will of God, right? So you'll just do whatever.
Right.
Right. So
A quick note on that. It's like when we got announced at conference to go to Hungary, like I knew when we were in the office talking to Pastor Ruby, I knew we were talking about Hungary. And he mentioned the city, but I was talking and I didn't pay attention. And so we get announced. And so when we're walking down from the stage, I asked my husband, now where are we going again? And so he's like,
they're going to ask me afterwards.
right. He's like, depression. I'm like, okay. I was like, I've never heard of it, but okay.
I'll go.
that's
Yes.
funny. So where do you see yourself in the future then, after Hungary?
After Hungary?
Or how long do you guys see yourselves in Hungary? Is there a limit? Like, do they limit you on how long you can be there?
I don't know. I mean, most people that I know are usually overseas for about 5 years, right? But the Andersons, they spent a total of 21 years with a 3-year break in between. I don't know. I mean, we're just willing to do whatever God wants us to do or have us wherever we have us. I know if we were to come back, I think it might depend even on, well, no, I don't think age would matter. I was like, it might depend on how old we are. We would pioneer another nation. But I like the East Coast a lot. I wouldn't mind pioneering in the East Coast,
Yeah.
But yeah, and Iceland, I liked the idea of Iceland until I found out how cold it was. But Hungary's cold too, so I'm a Texan and I like the summer,
But maybe that's the next step, right? Right, you get acclimated to the Hungarian weather, and then now you're like, okay, I'm ready for Iceland.
Right.
My blood's thickened up a bit.
Funny thing
I can handle
is
it.
right before this big freeze that we had, our AC unit went completely out, so we had no heat, and so for 2 months, a month, I don't know, it was very cold. It wasn't the big freeze yet, but it was cold, and I was doing fine, right?
You're doing okay.
But now our heater and our AC are working, right? Thank God the technicians got everything straightened out, because it was an ordeal. Like, they were working on it the whole time. They just couldn't figure it out, kind of a thing. And so now I have it, and so now the slightest thing makes me cold again, But I guess, I don't know, God was prepping me
Right,
for Hungary.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So with everything going on in the world and, kind of all the tension and stuff around the world, it doesn't worry you at all being over there if some major wars break out or all the stuff that we know is going to kind of happen in the end days. So, yeah, I mean,
Does it worry me?
just being kind of vulnerable in a country that
Over
is
there,
in the midst of it. And
so I don't listen to what's going on for that reason.
everything's great. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay. But I don't listen to what's going on for that reason. I didn't know a lot of what was going on in Brazil, or what I would be facing when I went to Brazil, and so I guess I adapt and I acclimate better than I prepare, kind of a thing. I think it would affect me more if I was really, really paying attention. So no, it doesn't worry me. I think what I worry more about is if anything happens here, me being able to get back. Like my mom's 84 years old, If something happens to my mother, will I be able to be there with her in her last days or that kind of thing? And then I just have to kind of resolve, Jesus, I love you more. I'm going, in faith. I'm believing God to take care of her. My prayer is, God, let her be alive and well when I'm done with this mission, And she lives a really, really simple country kind of a life, which is what she always wanted, right?
Yes.
So I think because of that, she's doing well. She's outlived her parents. She's outlived most of her grandparents. I think just one of her grandmother was 108 years old.
108. Wow.
And she's like, and I want to beat her. And so, yeah.
She's a fighter. She's a fighter.
She is. She is. So.
Nice. That's awesome. Do you have any other questions?
Well, I do, but and we can edit this out, and you can totally not answer me, but I'm a very curious person, so I have no problem asking questions. How did you reckon, and this is going back, how did you solidify or reckon in your heart that you were okay with being single and married? Like if he ever left, I don't know. Like how did you come to that decision? And I don't know. I think I'm just curious.
I think it goes back to that, Jesus, I love you more, because I love God so much I didn't want to do anything else to offend him. I didn't want to make another mistake, and so I was fine. I was fine just being by myself. He was enough for me. Jesus was enough. I know it sounds kind of weird, but
but yeah,
but he really was. He is my all in all.
Yeah.
And so I was just okay with it. It's just I figured you have problems single, you have problems married. You know what I'm saying? It's like life is, and so if I have to live by myself the rest of my life, I'm okay because I'm not alone. I have Jesus, and so.
Okay.
And I had a great support system at the church too. I really did, and so yeah.
So you never I don't know. It's like you didn't feel lonely or abandoned, or
I mean, I did. I'm sure. You know what I mean? Like honestly, when I talk about it, I feel like I'm lying because any hurt and damage that was done, Jesus completely healed.
Yeah.
And I don't feel it. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
like with what I felt towards my father, I felt it even, in well into my salvation, I felt it. I would get angry.
Yeah.
But when I talk about my first marriage, I don't feel it. It's like Jesus healed everything. Jesus healed everything with my dad too, obviously.
Correct. Yeah.
Right. But so when I talk about it, it's like I don't even talk about it because I feel like I'm a liar. Kind of a thing. Like, it feels like it never happened.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, yeah. But no, I think my father raised us to be very strong. Right. He was like, my girls are going to work in a man's world. They're not going to be cheated because they're girls. They're not going to have to put up with a jerk. That was my dad's whole thing, I guess, because he knew the problems that him and my mom were faced because of how he was, right? He didn't want us to live through that. And so we're all very self-sufficient, very, strong. And so I just felt I don't want to go to hell. I don't want to offend God. I know, I have cause. I could file and it would be okay. I have cause biblically, but God doesn't like it. And so I was like, so I'm not going to put my hand in it,
Yeah.
And so if this is my law, it's because of my decision. It goes back to like, hey, I did this to myself. So this is my consequence, and I'm just going to deal with it, you know.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay, so if so for any young girls that are, you know, going through what you've gone through, you know, drowning their sorrows in alcohol or, you know, suppressing certain feelings and emotions, like what kind of words of wisdom would you tell them?
Well, first of all, drinking makes you stupid. It does. And it makes you do a lot of things that you regret. And it doesn't make anything go away. It doesn't solve anything. Jesus really is the answer for everybody's life. I don't care what you're going through. I don't care if it's depression, anger, you know, if you're down and out. It doesn't matter what it is. Jesus is the answer. He is the way, the truth, and the life. And so I would just say, just engulf yourself in the Word of God and delve into Jesus, because He's the only one who's going to change anything. And people who don't have problems are not happy and are miserable. When I first came to Jesus, I wasn't having problems. Life was good, but I was missing something. And so it's Jesus, you know. So.
Is there anything else you want to say that we didn't ask a question that you wanted to talk about or anything?
You know, I always worry about, like, this is another reason that I don't like to talk about my first marriage, is because obviously, you know, I've done very well through the divorce and through courtship and remarriage and stuff. And so, so I think people think that it's easy, and it isn't easy. And so I don't like to talk about it, because if somebody's in that arena where they're battling, maybe I should just leave my husband, or maybe I should just leave my, I don't want them to think, oh, well, you know, Ruby made it, or this person made it, or that person made it, so it's okay, I'm going to be okay. Because there's so many battles and struggles that you go through spiritually, that even if you're not involved in something, because of the fact that, say, your spouse is not saved and they're doing things wrong, you fight battles that they're going through or what they're doing, you know. It's totally not an easy thing to go through. And if I didn't have the relationship that I had with my headship, and I so thank God for Yolanda Ruby, because she really walked me every step of the way, I don't know how I would have fared, you know. But it was because I was so willing to be so transparent with them, and really willing to, like, you know what, I'm going to listen to everything you tell me to do. That's what I'm going to do. Even if it was something I didn't want to hear, something I didn't want to do, I was like, it's obedience is better than sacrifice, right? And even though I wouldn't be sacrificing, it was definitely better than rebellion, right?
Yes,
And
yeah.
so I really, really don't like to mention it very much, because of the fact that I don't want anybody to feel encouraged that it's okay and it's easy to get divorced and they're going to make it okay. So I would say, you know, fight for your marriage, work it out. I did everything that I could to do that. And even when I couldn't do anymore, I still wasn't going to end it. And so, and I really believe that because God knew my heart, that things played out the way they did, you know. And so I think that if anybody hears that part, that I would say that's one of the things I would want people to walk away with. And then the safest place to be is in the will of God. You know, it's one thing that I'm telling my mom right now, because my mom is really upset, and my sister too, about us leaving to Hungary, right? They're really upset. Even my mom called me. She didn't realize she was FaceTiming me. But I was in prayer at church, and she's FaceTiming. I'm like, Mom, look at your phone. Look at your phone, right? So she's FaceTiming me, and she tells me, you need to tell Ray to behave, you know, in Spanish, and not that nice, right? Like, y'all just want to be going off to other countries. He needs to stay here, and, you know.
Yeah.
And I'm like, Mom, it's like God is calling us to another country. And I have to keep reminding her, Mom, if we wouldn't have obeyed to go to Brazil, I may not be here today. You know. And so obedience is better than sacrifice, and I'm sacrificing while I'm obeying, right? But the safest place to be is in the will of God. I remember when I came back and telling my sister the whole story, everything that we went through, and she's like, would you go again? I was like, yes. Like, I would be afraid not to go.
Yes,
you know, it's
yeah.
like I feel so much safer going. And even though, you know, like my husband said and I said earlier, it is more of a sacrifice, and there is things going on, like it's more of a struggle. There's more of a, not resistance. There's more, I guess, personal attack on me, right? To make me want to back down from going, but I'm not backing down. but there's such a peace. Like Jesus really is the Prince of Peace. You know,
Yes.
it's like, even though I know this could happen, that could happen, this is happening over here, and I'm not going to be here for it. It's like through it, it's like Jesus is just giving me peace. Like, just go, you know.
Yeah, it's gonna be.
It's
Yeah.
like, and it's like, and it's all in his hands. Could I change anything if I was here? Probably not. You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
You know, could I add a gray hair to my head? I have. Yes, no. You know, because, you know.
Yeah.
But so, you know, I'm just believing God and trusting Him,
Good.
and really, that's really the safest place to be.
Yes.
Whatever God is calling you to do, I say
Yes.
do it, because there's so much fulfillment in it. It's like, I've never been so fulfilled, you know. It's funny because people asked me before I had been asked, like, you gave up a lot when you came back to Jesus, because, you know, I was, acting, dancing, modeling, you know, doing all these things, right? My little ladder of fame. I had a lot of money. I went from there to, I just got a job at Bill Miller's because I wanted to tithe, you know. And I couldn't stand working at Bill Miller's. Yeah, but I did, you know. But so, you know, tell me, like, you know, was it hard for you? Like, I didn't even feel like I lost anything because I gained Jesus. You know,
Yes,
it's like, how can
yeah.
I feel like I've lost? I can't. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. That's worthless stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, and I already knew it wasn't fulfilling. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, good. I mean, you can tell both of you are definitely in the will of God. It's cool to see you guys just go with the flow, whatever God calls you to do. Like, all right, well, let's do it. That's awesome.
Yes, I love that. I love that.
It's definitely an adventure.
Yes. Yes.
You know, it's funny because before I came back, one of the things I was going to do is I was going to join the military, but I was too short. They denied me because of my height. They gave me a waiver, a 2-inch waiver, but I was still half an inch too short.
Oh.
Yeah, and my recruiters, they were really vexed because I scored really high on my ASVAB, and I breezed through the physical part of it, the test. And so I was like, I've never heard of anybody not making it in because of height. Yeah. So my mom says, I know why you didn't make it. She said, because from the moment the recruiters had picked you up, she said, I just fell to my knees and I started praying until I knew you were back.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, don't let her go, you know.
Yeah.
But, you know, when people would ask me why I wanted to join the military, it was like, I want to travel the world. Like, I want to go places, you know. I loved my country and I wanted to defend my country, but I don't know. I don't know if I would have chickened out in war. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
I don't know. I'd like to say I wouldn't, but I don't know. I don't think I would have been somebody who wanted to be infantry for sure, you know?
Right. I think you would have been tough. Here she is all boxing as a little kid. Like, I think you would have been tough. Right?
Very. But it's so funny because when I got saved, you know, I didn't plan it, but I ended up working at Fox. Right. I was going to be, I couldn't do it because I was pregnant, but I was going to be the next Commander KO. You know, I was on the radio with WOAI. I'm traveling, like I've traveled, you know, not a whole lot, but more than I would have.
Yeah.
And so it's like, God really does give you the desires of your heart, you know?
Yes.
And so, but it's so awesome that you get to enjoy those things saved and not with regrets and not, you know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, that's so true. It's so true, though. You know what I mean? Like you said, he gave you the desire. You still got to travel, but you were in his will, and you got to see so many miracles and so many lives change. Like, oh, I just didn't go travel. Yeah, I got more of an experience.
Right.
Yes,
it meant a lot more than just going and visiting a site, you know, or whatever.
Absolutely. Yes. No, that's awesome.
Well, like I said, with pastors, you know, we're excited to see what God does for you guys in Hungary. I'm sure it'll be great out there for you guys. So thank you for coming out here and sharing your story.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you.
Good. Thank you guys for watching. Join us next time.
We'll see you. Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us. We want to give a shout out to the Choosing Hope Foundation. Go to the website, choosinghopefoundation.org. See what they're doing over there, man. Wrapped around prison ministries, just doing big things out there. Check it out if you want to donate, or if you just want to see, or if you just want to just check it out and see what can happen. Hey, just see what can happen. Check out lifespeakspodcast.com and be up on the info about our podcast. And thank you so much for watching. If you want to donate, you have an option on there. Next, the Potter's House, GRA.com with our church, Universal Church in Universal City, Greater Randolph area, 2025 Universal City Boulevard. Come and check us out, see how God's moving. Let's check out the website. Once again, it's thepottershousegra.com. And man, just see how God is just moving over there. And it is awesome. Like, subscribe to our podcast, ring the bell so you get all the notifications. And thank you so much for joining us.